The year was 1979, and Richard Miller's world had collapsed into a silence that seemed to echo louder with each passing night. 2 years had crawled by since his wife Anne's death, and in that time the laughter, warmth, and hope that once filled their home had drained away, leaving a hollow stillness that clung to the walls like dust. At 34, Richard lived like a man twice his age. Evenings found him hunched at his kitchen table, a chipped mug of coffee cooling between his hands, his gaze locked on the faded wallpaper across from him. The paper was cracked, peeling at the edges, curling like tired leaves. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall, each tick a cruel reminder of time moving forward while he remained stuck in place. The town whispered about him, as small towns always do. He should remarry, some said. Start fresh, have kids, move on. Others clucked their tongues in sympathy when they saw him walking alone down Main Street, his shoulders slightly hunched as though carrying a weight no one else could see. But Richard didn't want to start over. That phrase made his stomach twist. To start over would mean erasing Anne, erasing everything they had dreamed of together. He remembered the nights they lay awake talking about a house filled with children's voices, about chaos and joy spilling out of every room. Anne had longed to be a mother, not to 1 or 2 children, but to a whole brood. She used to joke about setting a world record for the biggest family in town. Richard had always laughed, shaking his head, but he secretly loved the idea. They hadn't been able to make it happen before illness claimed her. But her words remained lodged in him like a seed. On her final night, her hand small and cool in his, Anne had whispered a request that became his compass in the years that followed. Don't let love die with me, Richard. Give it somewhere to go. That promise haunted him and guided him, though he had no idea where it would eventually lead. It was a rain-soaked evening when fate intervened. Richard's old truck had sputtered and died on a lonely stretch of road near the city's edge. Muttering under his breath, soaked to the bone, he trudged toward the only building with its lights still on, St. Mary's Orphanage, a looming stone structure that seemed equal parts sanctuary and sorrow. He stepped inside, dripping water onto the tiled floor, and asked to use the phone. While waiting, a sound drifted toward him down a dim corridor, the muffled cries of babies. It was not one cry, not 2, but a chorus of fragile voices that pulled at him like a magnet. Curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, compelled him to follow. At the end of the hall, in a small, overcrowded room, he froze. Cribs were jammed together, nearly touching, each one holding a tiny infant. 9 baby girls, their skin shades of deep brown, their wide eyes, glossy with tears, lifted fragile arms as if reaching for someone who might save them. Their cries overlapped in a ragged symphony, some wailing, some hiccuping, others too weak to make more than soft whimpers. Richard's throat tightened. He gripped the doorframe to steady himself. 9. There were 9 of them. A young nurse noticed him standing there. She moved closer, her voice low, as if the truth she carried was too heavy for the walls to bear. They came together, she whispered, left on the church steps in the middle of the night. No note, no names, just 9 infants bundled in the same blanket. Richard stared, unable to look away. 9, he echoed, barely breathing the word. The nurse's eyes softened with pity. No one wants them, she said. People come in willing to adopt one, maybe 2, but never all. They'll be separated eventually. That word struck him like a blade. Separated. His mind reeled with images of Anne's promise, of the way she used to say family wasn't about blood, but about choice. He imagined these girls pulled apart, scattered into homes that might not understand them, love them, or worse, that might not want them at all. His chest tightened with something fierce and unrelenting. He took a step closer to the cribs. One baby, her tiny fists clenched, stared up at him with startling intensity, as if she already recognized him. Another reached out a trembling hand, brushing against his sleeve. A third let out a hiccup of a smile, gums showing through her tears. Something cracked wide open inside Richard. The emptiness that had consumed him for 2 years shifted into something new, something heavier, yes, but also alive. Responsibility. His voice trembled when he spoke. What if someone took all of them? The nurse blinked at him, then almost laughed. All 9? Sir, no one can raise 9 babies. Not alone. Not without money. People would say you're crazy. But Richard wasn't listening anymore. His decision had already taken root, deeper than reason, deeper than fear. He touched the crib rail with a steadying hand and whispered, "I'll take them." The weeks that followed were a battlefield of paperwork, arguments, and suspicion. Social workers called him reckless. His relatives shook their heads, saying he was throwing his life away. Neighbors whispered behind curtains, "What's a white man doing with 9 black babies?" Some muttered darker things he tried to block out, but Richard did not bend. He sold his truck, his tools, even Anne's jewelry. The last pieces of her he still held. He begged for overtime at the factory, patched roofs on weekends, scrubbed dishes on the night shift at a diner. Every dollar went into formula, diapers, and cribs he built with his own calloused hands. The house that had once been empty now rang with noise, the shrill cry of hunger, the babble of laughter, the endless shuffle of tiny feet. Sleepless nights blurred into endless days. Bottles boiled on the stove in constant rotation. Laundry lines sagged under 9 sets of baby clothes. Richard learned to braid hair with clumsy fingers, learned which lullaby soothed which child, learned to count their breaths in the dark when fear of losing them kept him awake. The world outside their walls was not kind. Parents at the park pulled their children closer when Richard arrived with his brood. Strangers stared openly in grocery store aisles. Once a man spat at Richard's feet and muttered, "You'll regret this." But regret never came. Instead came moments. The first time all 9 girls laughed at once. A chorus so pure it rattled the walls and filled the house with a joy Richard thought he'd never feel again. The sight of them crawling in a line down the hallway like a little train, bumping into each other and collapsing into giggles. The stormy night when the power went out and all 9 huddled against him, their small bodies warm and trusting in the dark. These were the things that mattered. Richard knew the world would never stop questioning him, never stop doubting. But when he looked at the 9 little girls who had turned his grief into something fierce and unshakable, he understood one thing with absolute certainty. He had kept his promise. He had given love somewhere to go, and though the road ahead would test him in ways no man could prepare for, Richard Miller was no longer a man hollowed by loss. He was a father 9 times over. Raising 1 child was always said to be a challenge. Raising 9 alone was nothing short of a war. Richard Miller lived in a state of perpetual exhaustion. His hands bore calluses from endless extra shifts. His back ached from lifting, carrying, chasing. Yet his heart grew stronger with each passing year, stretched wide enough to hold 9 lives in its embrace. Each of the girls began to reveal her own rhythm, her own spark. Sarah, the eldest by only a matter of minutes, carried the loudest laugh in the house, a sound that could cut through even the heaviest silence. Ruth, in contrast, was clingy, her small fists always knotted into Richard's shirt whenever strangers came near, her wide eyes suspicious of the outside world. Naomi and Esther were mischievous co-conspirators, forever sneaking cookies from the counter and scattering crumbs like evidence across the floor. Leah possessed a tenderness far beyond her years, often the first to step forward when fights broke out, her tiny hand settling on a sister's shoulder like a gentle anchor. Mary, quiet but fierce, surprised them all by being the first to walk, taking unsteady steps across the living room while her sisters clapped and squealed. And then there were Hannah, Rachel and little Deborah, inseparable, always tumbling together in games that filled the house with ceaseless noise. To the outside world, they were the Miller 9. Some whispered the name with awe, marveling at the impossibility of it all. Others spoke it with suspicion, their tones sharp with judgment. But to Richard, they were simply his daughters. Still, the weight of scrutiny followed him everywhere. At school drop-offs, other mothers stood in small clusters, whispering behind raised hands. "What's his angle? Why would a white man adopt 9 black girls?" Some accused him of doing it for attention. Others questioned his morality, even his sanity. Richard never answered. He never raised his voice or tried to explain himself. Instead, he showed up each day, carrying bagged lunches he had packed the night before, braiding hair with clumsy but determined fingers, tying shoes he had saved weeks to afford. Money was scarce. Richard often skipped meals so his daughters wouldn't have to. He stretched groceries until they barely held together, patched shirts until the fabric thinned into threads. At night, when the girls finally fell asleep and the house quieted, he would sit alone at the kitchen table, bills stacked like enemies in front of him. His head often sank into his hands, fatigue pressing down like stone. But when morning came, he made sure his daughters never saw despair in his eyes. When they looked at him, they saw strength, and that reflection gave him the strength to keep going. There were moments of grace, too, moments that stitched them tighter than blood ever could. Birthdays celebrated with lopsided cakes that collapsed in the middle, but tasted sweet enough to fill the room with laughter. Christmas mornings when 9 pairs of hands tore open gifts wrapped in old newspaper, squealing as if each package were treasure. Long summer nights spent under the stars, all of them squeezed together on one blanket in the backyard, listening as Richard told stories about Anne, the mother they never knew but who lived in every sacrifice he made. Slowly, against the odds, the girls grew, not just taller but rooted. They excelled in school. They learned to defend each other against the world's unkindness, standing shoulder to shoulder whenever doubt or cruelty tried to divide them. And no matter how wide the world stretched before them, they always came home to Richard. But time is merciless. By the late 1990s, Richard's hair had silvered and his back bent from decades of hard labor. The girls, now young women, began to leave one by one, first for college, then for jobs, then for marriages. The house that had once rattled with cries, laughter, and endless motion grew quiet again. On the night the last daughter moved out, Richard sat alone on the couch, staring at the frame photo of all 9 lined up as toddlers, their grins like pearls strung together. He whispered into the silence, his voice quivering with both sorrow and fulfillment. "I kept my promise, Anne." Decades passed. The girls flourished. Sarah became a teacher, her booming laugh now echoing in classrooms filled with children who adored her. Ruth, once timid, became a nurse, her touch steady and reassuring in moments of crisis. Naomi and Esther, still partners in mischief but matured by experience, grew into artists, their work celebrated in galleries. Leah carried her tenderness into social work, holding together families on the verge of falling apart. Mary, quiet but fierce, became a lawyer, fighting battles in courtrooms with a determination that left her opponents rattled. Hannah and Rachel, inseparable as ever, opened a small business together, their sisterhood the backbone of its success. And Deborah, the youngest, pursued medicine, her dedication born from years of watching her father sacrifice without complaint. They built their own lives, but they never drifted far from the man who had given them everything. Every holiday, they returned to the modest house, filling it once again with the noise of family until the walls seemed to swell with joy. Richard, his hair now white and his body frail, would sit back in his chair, his eyes wet, marveling at the miracle he had once been both foolish enough and brave enough to choose. Now, 46 years later, the year was 2025. Richard sat in a grand armchair, his body thin, his hands veined and tremulous, but his eyes still sharp with the clarity of a promise fulfilled. Around him 9 women, no longer girls but radiant, confident, accomplished women, stood close. They wore matching cream-colored dresses, their arms draped over his shoulders, their faces pressed near his, smiles blooming like flowers in spring. Photographers circled, their cameras clicking, capturing the moment that would be broadcast across the world. Headlines blazed across news outlets. In 1979, he adopted 9 black girls. See them now, but for Richard, it was never about headlines. It was about this moment, this circle completed. The babies no one had wanted had grown into women the world now admired. And he, the man everyone doubted, had lived long enough to see it. Grace, one of his daughters, leaned close, her voice soft as she whispered, "Dad, you did it. You kept us together." Richard's lips trembled into a smile. His voice, fragile but steady, answered, "No, we did it. Love did it." The room fell into a profound silence as each daughter leaned in, pressing against him, encasing his frail frame in a circle of warmth and strength. 9 women who had once been fragile infants abandoned on church steps now stood as a living testament to the power of choice, the endurance of sacrifice, and the promise of love. For the first time in 46 years, Richard allowed himself to weep without hiding it. His tears spilled freely, not from sorrow, but from gratitude for Anne's words that had guided him, for the 9 daughters who had saved him as much as he had saved them, and for the life they had built together against every odd. The promise was not only kept, it had blossomed.